Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. So how are you today, Ken?
I'm delighted to be here, Rory. And in real time, as this is going out, it is the academic break in the UK, a time when we kind of sit back a little and go, well, that's the team here at Counselling Tutor, but I wonder where you might be at listening to this. This is out of academic time, so it is special time, and we have a great special podcast today, Rory. You had a chat with one of the BACP representatives about a really hot topic, and that's kind of employability, getting a job as a counsellor.
Yes, I caught up with Chris Ambler, who's a workforce lead for the BACP, and he talked about what the organisation were doing in terms of promoting paid work to organisations and the private sector. And it seems, as we tend to do with our podcast, we kind of pull the curtain back, see the inner workings of organisations. And Chris very ably explores just exactly the amount of work that's going on to raise the awareness of mental health and also counselling within different organisations, be that in the private or the public sector. So let's hear what he has to say. And we welcome Chris Ambler, who's the workforce lead at the BACP, who's kindly come to talk about employment opportunities and how the BACP are supporting the profession in finding employment opportunities. So, Chris, a very warm welcome to you.
Welcome, Rory. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, it's really good to catch up on the inner workings of the BACP. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast, you probably caught the first podcast where we talked about we talked about resources for private practitioners and supporting private practitioners. But your role is slightly different. How would you outline your role as workforce lead, Chris?
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. My role is slightly different. It does cut across a number of different areas. My role is different in the sense that I'm helping to drive growth in paid opportunities and bring employers across the sectors, so the public sector, the private sector, and the sort of charity and third sector, closer to the counselling and psychotherapy professions. So it's a broader role. There's elements of strategic partnership working in there, but as well as helping and supporting members on the ground with very practical business-related issues.
Yeah, so if you were to take an example of the more strategic element or strategic part of the role, who would you be talking to or contacting on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it really varies, Rory. It can be employers, so sometimes we'll be contacted by an employer, an organisation that are looking to embed a wellbeing plan, for instance, in their organisation, and they're looking for some advice and guidance on how best to go about employing counsellors as part of that range of measures. It can also be large employer representative bodies like the Federation for Small Business or ACAS, for instance, working with them on packages of support for organisations or toolkits to help support people's mental health at work. A recent example, we've been working with the John Lewis Partnership's Working Well Coalition for the last year now. And through that group, we've written letters to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, asking for policy changes that will open up the opportunities for employers to invest in a range of mental health provision for their employees, and particularly counselling and psychotherapy. So we're very keen to present the voice of our members within those conversations and ensure that employers of all kinds understand the value of counselling in the workplace, for example.
So it sounds like you're advocating at quite a high level for counsellors and trying to get across the value and benefit of counselling being part of any kind of organisational structure with mental health, I guess, being at record levels, or poor mental health being at record levels at the moment.
Absolutely. And not just if we take the employment context, there are a number of emerging challenges well before COVID came along and changed the world as we know it. But before then, we've seen a growth in mental health issues amongst millennials, in particular in organisations, rising depression in that particular age group. We've also got a large group of people who are employed who are overlooked and don't access support, and we need to understand why that is. If we take a sector-specific approach, we contributed to a recent point by the Chartered Institute of Builders on mental health in the construction industry, and that report found that 1 in 4 construction workers have considered suicide. In the farming community, we've worked with the National Farmers Union and other rural-based organisations to understand the prevalence of mental health problems and suicide in farming communities as well. And again, those statistics show that almost 1 farmer a week dies as a result of taking their own life. So, we're keen to understand these issues and also talk about how our membership and the professionals that make up that can help with these very real issues for industry and also for society as well.
Yeah, it sounds like the interface between the membership and areas, different areas where counselling is going to be really useful, and where there's maybe a deficit or a gap in mental health. You're presenting the BACP and by definition the members and saying, look, this is what we can do. This is the kind of services that can be offered to help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about anticipating those needs, as they develop, but also being responsive at the same time. And that, to do that, to help our members better respond, that's about building the capacity and skills for them to be able to manoeuvre in this changing employment landscape. And again, COVID has presented a new set of challenges. But again, before then even, we were seeing a real shift in the way people were working and the way mental health, I think broadly across society, is being viewed, which is largely positive. What we need to see is more investment, and that is a key part of my role as well, is to make that case.
So in terms of the employment landscape, Chris, what is the employment landscape? If we take post-COVID, what was it then, and how do you see it now?
Yeah, pre-COVID, if there was a message to anybody coming into the profession now, I think there are a general set of rules for career success, but I think in counselling, more and more people are moving towards a sort of portfolio way of working. And I think that's reflected in wider society with the rise of the gig economy. But, almost 80% of our members work in private practice, but many of them will also work for employee assistance program providers in organisational settings. They may also do other non-therapeutic work as part of that. And again, I think that that reflects the wider shift in society to people working in different ways. That might be short-term contracts. It might be, for example, 0-hour contracts, which do support some people, don't offer a great deal in terms of security. So what we've seen over the last year, there's been a real growth actually in roles within EAP settings. And in my conversations regularly with the EAP Association, as well as individual EAPs who form part of our accredited membership, the message is quite positive in as much that they're recruiting more people as we emerge out of the COVID-19 lockdown situation that we're in now, and that they recognise that people will need more support within and outside of work, which is one of the real benefits, I suppose, of the EAP. So on that side of things, the messages are positive, but they also come with challenges for individual practitioners. And again, we've worked hard to represent our members and the profession in our discussions with the EAPs recently on things like pay and when people are paid. So we're aware of these things, and we try and work closely with organisations to resolve issues when they arise.
Yeah, so it sounds like the modern world of employment in counselling is very much the mixed economy, where people may find themselves doing a variety of roles, counselling being one of them, but they may be working in an allied profession using counselling skills, but in a different function.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in how COVID has impacted on the counselling landscape. Is there any kind of employment trends coming from COVID, with more people working remotely, people working at home? Has that had an impact on employment patterns?
It's possibly too early to say, other than anecdotally. Now, I'm working with organisations that are delivering against government contracts, so the TechForce contract, which was very much about supporting people digitally who were self-isolated, and NHS workers in particular. And we assisted with a bid from an organisation which would then employ BACP members to deliver that counselling. So there have been opportunities that have arisen as a result of COVID, but also it has changed the way people work. And we've recently got the results back of our COVID-19 member survey, and we've done some early work on that as a policy team and identified some trends. So, of course, less people are able to work face-to-face because of social distancing. And that has meant that people have to switch to telephone provision online or via email and other distance means. And generally, what our research is showing early on is that therapists, professionals have responded well to that and have met the challenge, that many already have the skills and competencies to do that. But it's also brought forward some issues for us to consider about how telephone and face-to-face counselling are paid. With many people saying, actually, it's more difficult. It's more challenging at the moment to deliver counselling broadly. I mean, generally, because there are issues with boundaries, people working from home. I mean, most people we talk to now, you can hear children or delivery people in the background.
Yes.
It's part of the new organisational reality, isn't it, for everybody? But that's especially difficult in the therapeutic context. So these are all things that individuals are having to work with now that they didn't at one time. It makes it harder. So these are things that, again, messages that we can take back to employers and to policymakers and say, as we have done through, we've got a wider campaign which is promoting investment in counselling and psychotherapy due to the COVID-19. And there's a coalition of over 20 organisations that joined that campaign. So, we're very much fighting the corner, as it were.
Yes, it sounds very much like you're kind of getting involved at a number of levels. And I know that one of the areas that you'll probably get involved with is speaking at commissioner level. Commissioners usually are the people who hold the purse strings for charitable organisations. They're the guardians of government money as their kind of the flow goes in to charities. What kind of conversations would you have for commissioners that would benefit colleagues maybe working in an agency or getting paid working in an agency?
Well, I mean, there's a number of ways actually that I've been working with on behalf of members around commissioning over the last 6 months to a year. One of the things is to put on our website a resource around understanding public sector commissioning and procurement and how that works, because for many it can seem absolutely impenetrable. And yet, the public sector invests over £900 billion a year in a variety of services, but mental health is a really considerable chunk of that. And a lot of it tends to go to the usual suspects. Local authorities, commissioners, clinical commissioning groups have a responsibility under the Social Value Act to ensure that when they do procure services, they're not excluding either third sector groups or smaller businesses and organisations that are actually much better placed usually to deliver services because they understand their communities better. So for me, it's about raising the awareness of those messages to members, to pointing them in the right direction in terms of support for public sector contracts. So we've got a list on the webpage of portals, as well as some description about what the process of procurement is. But also we've been encouraging smaller providers to come together and form consortia so that they can bid for larger contracts. And again, we've put some resource into developing support for members around those. In terms of talking to commissioners, we're in the process at the moment, actually, of talking to local authority and clinical commissioning groups to, again, highlight the very important role that locally based service providers can provide in meeting a range of local health outcomes, mental health, financial, social, and so on. So moving forward, that's going to be a real key focus of the work. I think at the moment, in the current landscape, commissioners will have, a different set of priorities. But it's absolutely something that we're keen to pursue, and we are pursuing. One of the pieces of work that we were doing pre-COVID was mapping the commissioning arrangements, because they frequently change, particularly in the NHS, and it is very difficult unless you understand how commissioning works and who the key figures are to navigate your way through that. So we want to make that as open as possible. We're working with a body actually called the National Counselling Network as well, and there is a counselling centre based in Shropshire among them, and we've been undertaking some early discussion about how we can help them engage better with commissioners in their area, and how those centres might come together to share resources and become more resource efficient as they move forward, again to present better value to commissioners. Because again, that's one of the things that smaller providers will often lose out on is their ability to undercut everybody like some of the larger providers can. So it's about trying to assist in that sort of parity of esteem, if you like, as well.
Yes, and I think for those colleagues who are listening, who might be thinking of starting their own organisation, you touched on the grassroots element being very important, and commissioners taking real note of organisations really understanding the pulse of the people in their communities, and starting maybe charitable organisations or support. And it sounds like you're providing a route for organisations to really detangle the shifting sands of government funding, which moves quite often. At the end of this, I'm really struck that it seems that your role is kind of multifunctional. You're talking to employers, to the private sector as well as the public sector. What kind of conversations do you have with big private sector organisations?
Big private sector organisations, I mean, that can vary. Quite often, they will be at different points in terms of their journey investing in counselling and psychotherapy. For some organisations, particularly the larger EAPs, and I won't name them, the conversations vary. So recently, one of the conversations that we had was driven by member concern. So a large number of members got in touch with us and said, our contracts have been changed to telephone delivery, often in terms of mid-counselling delivery with a client, which of course, is problematic in a number of ways. But the key issue for many was the fact that they were losing up to 70% of their income purely by switching from face-to-face to telephone. And they felt that wasn't fair. I mean, it isn't sustainable for them either, but it simply isn't fair because they could hardly help the COVID-19 crisis came along. So we spoke to an employer, a large employer, EAP. We made representations on behalf of the members, and subsequently they made the decision to pay the face-to-face rate for telephone provision as well, as a goodwill gesture. I wouldn't go as far as to say they did that because of us, but we were certainly instrumental, and I'm sure they wouldn't like it if we said that either. But we were certainly instrumental. Also, we've recently spoken to a large insurer. They've changed to an extent their employment practices so that they will only recruit accredited BACP members and counsellors that are accredited by other bodies. And so we're talking to them about helping members through the accreditation process so they continue working with that organisation.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. I think you've successfully pulled back the curtain into a specific part of the workings of the BACP and how actively the organisation is engaging in not only giving practitioners a voice, but actually looking and really investigating employment opportunities by speaking directly to a number of people and getting them to see both the value of counselling and also in the last instance advocating for just a bit of equity, a bit of a bit of fairness. So thank you for joining us, and Chris Ambler, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory. You're more than welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Rory. That was, I think, eye-opening. And so often we see in our Facebook page, if you're not a member of that, get in on the conversation by going to Facebook and putting in Counselling Tutor. We see people mentioning, I've now qualified or I'm about to qualify and I'm looking out in the workforce. Are there any jobs? And I think that really just coloured in a lot of what is being done.
Yes, absolutely. And paid work, people pay a lot of money to train, and people rightly want careers out of becoming a counsellor, and there is a lot of unpaid work about, but it is interesting to hear exactly the work that an ethical body is doing to promote paid work for qualified counsellors.
Well, there you have it. That's Rory and myself checking out for this academic year, and we'll of course be checking back in again when the new academic year starts up here in the UK. So we're looking forward to that because we have a brand new format that we're going to be launching for the Counselling Tutor podcast. So we do hope that you will continue to join us along that journey. So
we look forward to meeting you all again, refreshed and ready to go in the exciting world of counselling.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.